Hey, what's going on, FLC family? Man, I am excited to be here. I've actually watched a lot of these, and now that I have the opportunity to be a part of
You're in the seat.
Yeah, I'm in the seat. But I'm super excited about this, and you know, it's such a great privilege to kind of talk about the message and get to bring up, you know, what wasn't communicated. And that's the whole thing about these videos, is just to talk about what Chad didn't get to. That's the real reason. But ultimately, it just helps dig more honestly into what the message is, and gets to elaborate like your heart behind it and everything. And it's such a great time, and I'm super excited about it. And so, Mark, I mean, we've been
finally.
Yes. Oh my gosh. I've been like thinking about it and like, when are you getting to Mark? When are you getting to Mark?
Yeah.
We're not there just yet. We're not just there just yet. And so, finally getting to preach Mark 1.
Yes.
Verses 1 through 3.
Yeah, I made the joke that if you were wondering how long the series was going to be, we just did the first sermon over just 3 verses. So buckle up. You know, it could be a while, but Mark's an awesome book.
It is such. I mean, we've been talking about it for a while,
for a long time.
I've been digging into it, and he's been digging into it, and it's just been. It's been a ride. Mark is a different character, like the other Gospels, and you get into that. And so all of it. What is something that you felt like you left out, or what is something that you really just feel like that you need to kind of add into what you talked about yesterday or Sunday?
Well, I did let everybody know in the sermon itself that the original plan for part 1, we were going to go verse 1 to verse 15.
Oh yeah.
We were going to cover a big bulk of that section, of the opening section of the book. So I obviously left out a bunch. And decided, as I kind of looked at it, we were going to look at, you know, some keywords that arise in that section of text and kind of tie them all together originally in one sermon. But if you've been around a while, you know that's kind of impossible for me to do without taking an entire afternoon to preach through. And so what I decided to do was just break those apart. And so pretty much the original plan for part 1 of this series, kind of the opening sermon for the series, is now the first 3. We're going to make it into 3. So we're going to cover 15 verses in 3 weeks. Ooh. And so that's not a lot of verses in 3 weeks. Some would argue that we should move quite a bit quicker. But I will say, be encouraged. We're going to have larger sections that we'll cover later on, Lord willing. we'll be able to cover longer sections in one sermon. But I just felt like it was, I wanted to do so much of the front end. So we talked a lot about why the book of Mark, who Mark even is, and kind of why he's approaching writing it the way that he's writing it. I mean, we have had that conversation, just how he just dives in, and so he's altogether different in his approach than the other 4 Gospels. And so he's got an urgency about him that I think is a real breath of fresh air. That's not to say that Matthew, Luke, and John are not incredible books. They are. But I feel myself drawn so much to Mark, and that's kind of the point I wanted to make in the opening of the sermon, was a lot of we're like him, even in the way that he was, and some of the mistakes that he made early on that we learn about in the Bible and then also from church history. So there's so much of that I felt the need to kind of set the stage for that a little bit. I don't do a ton of that, a ton of stage setting like that, but I do like to do it, especially with this particular thing. We've never walked through a gospel here. And so, but it is one of my favorite, and those of us that have been around Freedom Life since I've been here, which is almost 4 years, which is crazy. This is my favorite approach to preaching. is getting a book of the Bible and then just walking through it. We do other things that are good. We do standalones and we do other series that are kind of maybe gathered around a particular idea or a particular concept, and then we begin to walk through texts that help us to understand that. But this is by far my favorite kind of preaching, is just exegetically just walking through a text. I enjoy the heck out of it. But I also know that there's so much where sometimes people don't get a chance to see everything that's in a book of the Bible. Maybe we don't read it all, or maybe we read it, but we just kind of read the words on the page and move on. This gives us a chance as a church to kind of break it down. So I've been excited about that, but I really felt the need to kind of intro it, talk about Mark. Why are we even doing it? Why did we go with this particular gospel as opposed to the others? And I just think, Mark is beautifully urgent.
Beautifully urgent.
There's an urgency, and we're going to talk a little bit. That'll come out later on in the series. We're going to talk about that. There's this beautiful urgency with Mark that he wants to get the reader into the thick of it, into the plot so quickly, so there's not a whole lot. It's not a slow-moving movie, if you will. It is, it's like opening scene and there's bombs going off, and you're in the thick of it, and those are the type of movies I like, is like when, the opening scene is not the backstory. It is bombs are blowing up and things are happening and you're in the thick of it. And that's what he does. And, we refer to him mentioning the beginning of the gospel of Jesus Christ is a bombshell. That's what it is, both culturally, religiously, it is, and it's explosive what he's doing, and so it gave us a chance to kind of talk about it. So I obviously left out a bunch because we turned one sermon into now three. But I will say one of the things that we did not talk about that I didn't touch on at all, is, we got to towards the end of the sermon, and I talked about the reality of the beginning of the gospel, the incarnation, not just a man showing up on the scene to change things, but God himself showing up to change things. That this good news is that he changes the inside and the outside. One of the things that I did not mention, because I think we're going to have an opportunity to get into it more later on in the book of Mark, we'll see it. So I didn't really mention it here, is on the outside, it changes so much of the outside, the way that we interact, and I think it's the incarnation, Jesus showing up, God in the flesh, is a great push for Christians in regard to social justice. The reason why Christians should care about and rally around things like moving towards the hurting. Moving towards the least of these, moving to those that are marginalized in culture. The reason why we should have such a passion for that is because we watch God of the universe incarnate living among us and walking, and we get to see him and his level of compassion towards the hurting. And we talked about changing the way that we love and are compassionate, but I don't think I ever mentioned anything about the call for the reason why Christians tend to lean towards social justice. I will say this, that I do think that sometimes we can be too concerned with social justice and forget the gospel.
Yeah, absolutely.
If that makes sense.
No, that's good.
And so whereas social justice is good, but if we as Christians, all we ever do is focus in on social justice, then it's like us in the Rotary Club. Like, we're no different. You know what I mean? Like, it's us, and we're no different than other organizations and other things that are all about if the gospel is left out of that element, which I think is the reason why I really didn't want to approach it from the social justice aspect. I wanted to keep the gospel in focus and the way that it changes us on the outside, just with dealing with people around us and our neighbors and our coworkers, compassion and love and all of that we begin to pour out, out of us because of what's happening on the inside. But I do think that should come into focus because we see Jesus as he moves in culture, social justice, like making right the wrongs is on the agenda,
Yeah.
and we get to see him walk through that. But it's always with the purpose of the gospel being seen and communicated and grasped and received in the midst of the social justice, which is the reason why I didn't necessarily mention it wholesale in the sermon, because I think we'll have opportunities as we kind of walk around with Jesus.
Absolutely.
As we move through the book of Mark. We're going to see that take place because he does that very early. I mean, chapter 2, chapter 3, immediately he's moving towards the hurting.
Absolutely.
Immediately he's moving towards areas of society that have been pushed away and pushed aside. He's moving towards them. And so we're going to get a chance to see that play itself out. But I just didn't really feel like I wanted to mention it here, because I think a lot of times when people hear, hey, Christians should be about social justice, that we make it about social justice and not this underlying reason why we would do that. And that's because this Jesus that has brought a new situation to the world through the good news that he has arrived, that begins to be the motivation for the Christian to move towards the hurting, so that they might see him. So you know what I mean. And so, so it is one of those things where I did kind of pull back from that, where originally I had the thought of moving into that space towards the end of the sermon with how this reality affects us on the outside, like changes the outside for us. I had the thought of kind of stepping out into that idea, but then kind of decided to pull it back and not really go there, because I don't want us to lose sight of really what Mark is trying to push us to from the outset of the book. This is the beginning of the gospel of Jesus Christ. He wants you to see that, hear that, and receive it. And so
in saying that, how would you feel that verses 1 through 3 helped you approach that?
Well, because he says it. Well, one of the really cool things that I liked about, and the reason why I really felt like we could spend a lot of time in just those first 3 verses, is because Mark reads the Bible. You see it in. By the time he gets to verse 2, he's quoting the Old Testament. He's quoting the prophet Isaiah in the Old Testament. And so he's pointing to a much bigger reality that's been happening since the beginning of time. That God's plan has now come to fruition. So the same way, and we talked about this a lot in the sermon itself, in the same way that the Israelites experienced, exile into Babylon, and then through the prophet Isaiah, he's talking about God's going to show up, and he's going to, he says in other places, we didn't read it, but he says in other places, like, God's going to show up and he's going to bear his holy arm, and he's going to bring you out, and he's going to kind of build this remnant of people that he's going to bring back to where they're supposed to be, and he's going to bring it all back. And so God's going to show up, and Mark sees that correlation as what's happening with Jesus. And he's saying this is it, as we are in culture, and this is not where we're supposed to be. God himself, in the person and work of Jesus, has shown up to take us out, to take us back to where we should be. And so he's so good about not just going, hey, here's what I think. He's saying, no, this has been something that's been talked about for 1,000 years. This is something that's been talked about, forever. Before we were ever a blip on the screen. Or a blip in the timeline. Isaiah was setting this up, and so I did mention, where Jesus actually quotes Isaiah. He reads it to the crowd. I have been anointed to set the captives free, to bring sight to the blind, and I've been anointed to do that, to lead people towards the day of the Lord. Jesus is quoting Isaiah as a correlation of that's ultimately talking about me showing up and bringing this anointing to set the captives of sin free. And Mark likes that. Mark is on board with that. And so then he opens the book to go, the gospel and And Isaiah has been talking about this. Isaiah has said this a long time ago, that this moment was coming. But that's the reason why I loved the correlation. You know, I even used there's an inscription about a Roman Caesar, the gospel. You know, they use that same word. So it's not just a Christian word. It is a word that was used all in that culture. And so that's what I loved about it as well, because it really set up this idea that Mark is going, hey, Romans, listen to what I'm saying, because they would have understood the word gospel. The gospel would have meant to them a new king has arrived. And that's why I loved pointing that out. But then to the Hebrew, it would have been like Isaiah showing up and saying, God's going to arrive. And so what is he saying? He's saying Jesus is both king and God. He is both of those arriving on the planet to bring a whole new thing, to change everything about what's happening. And so that's really what I was drawn to in the first, and like I said, really, verse 1 through 15, there's so many, he's talking about who is Jesus, how do I meet Jesus, and why should I even care about that? That's what he's doing, and so that's going to be the first 3 sermons. And so like in the next sermon, in the next part that we do this next week is really about, well, how do I meet him? What does that look like to encounter Jesus? Where does that happen? And so we're going to talk about that as well. And so I do think it's a really cool way that Mark opens the book, because he really wants to draw in what most of the readers, certainly the Hebrew readers, would have understood and they would have grasped. But even if a Roman picked up Mark's writing, they would have went, hold up. When they see the word gospel, they would have said, time out. So a new king has arrived? Whoa, that's huge. Who is he talking about? They would have been drawn in by that simple word, gospel, good news, glad tidings. They would have been drawn into that no matter who the reader was. They would have known what that was in Mark's world. And I think that that's what Christians should gravitate towards when it comes to the gospel, is people will be drawn to it when they understand the good news, and then when we introduce them to the bad news, which we did talk about. You know, nobody's perfect and nobody's right. Nobody is good, and Mark is calling us to the King who is God, this man who is God, and who has brought the good news that we can still belong to him. And I think it's a good way to open.
It's a great opening. Yeah. And so in saying that, how could you correlate that to the excitement of what's to come? Think about that. Like people who don't necessarily come on Sundays, or if you could relate the excitement of like how the beautiful urgency is going to move, not in the sense of like saying oh, it's going to be this long onset thing, but the idea of saying, hey, like church, like get ready, like because we're going to unpack some things that may be one, great, but also kind of difficult.
Well, I think it should excite us. I really do. I think it should. Certainly a believer should be very excited about the journey that we're going to go on in the book of Mark. And I think that's the reason why I gravitated so much towards how he opens, because he's starting with good news. And so what we're going to watch is we're going to watch good news live on the planet. If that makes sense.
Absolutely.
We're going to get a chance to watch that. And so I get really excited about it. And I understand, like, most people probably aren't going to be as geeked out about it as I am, which, hey, in fairness, I get it. But I do think those of us that are believers, we should be excited about looking at Jesus and who he was and what he was like, and to ponder that and to look at that, I think is going to be a really beautiful thing. And so a lot of times, part of the excitement for me is I love any of the other New Testament writers, Old Testament writers. I love it because it always points to Jesus. So when we did Exodus, I mean, we're constantly just gospel picture. We're seeing Jesus. We've gone through the book of Jonah in the Old Testament. Gospel, there's Jesus, it's there. We've done Ephesians. Gospel, Jesus, it's there. And so we've done these other books. but this is, we're going to be walking, we're going to watch, we're going to see him speak.
Yeah.
We're not going to have him quoted from somebody else. We're going to watch scenes with Jesus. Yeah. And so I'm excited about that, because I think a lot of times we don't do that as much as we should. Really think about and watch him, because a lot of times whenever people get into a gospel and start reading it, they're like, oh yeah, I heard that story before. Whoa, slow down. And we're going to get a chance to slow down and really see what Jesus is doing, because he's endlessly insightful. He's smart. You know what I'm saying? Like Jesus is, he's unbelievably wise how he approaches culture, how he breaks into it, and how he deals with different people. We get the chance to watch him deal with not just the hurting and outcasts of society. We get to watch him deal with the self-righteous and the religious. We get to see him deal with people that could care less about him. We get to see him deal with people that want to kill him. We get a chance to see him with people that just want him to do a miracle and so that they can roll out. We're going to get a chance to see him deal with all these different areas of society. We're going to get a chance to watch him at work. And I just think that's exciting. That is different in a lot of ways, and we see a lot of the effects of who he was going to be from the Old Testament. We get a lot of who he was in the New Testament, other New Testament writers like in the epistles and the writings of Paul and Peter and those guys. We get a chance to see kind of the aftermath of the beginning of the gospel colliding with earth. We get a chance to see some of the aftermath, in the book of Acts and things of that sort. But this is a gospel, so this is right in that zone where we get to read the red letters, if you will, where we're getting a chance to see Jesus speak and interact, and we get a chance to see these scenes. And so that's what makes me excited about it, because it is different. And I hope that other people get excited. And honestly, even if you're an unbeliever, and you're like, well, I don't even like Jesus. Well, do you even know what he was about? Do you even know what he said? Because you might know some of the outside stories, but maybe you don't really understand who he is. Well, why don't you just take an honest journey with us and let's look at what he's done, and let's look at what he said, and then maybe you can decide for yourself. But here's what I know is that if you see him for who he really is, then I think that you'll fall in love with him. I think that you'll know who he is. And I know that it's one of those things where I'm like, whenever I'm like, hey, what do I want for an unbeliever? Well, I want them to know Jesus. I want them to love Jesus. I want them to make Jesus their whole life. It can feel a little intense. It can feel a little quick. Like, hey, here's my cousin, and I want you to, introduce you to my cousin, and now I want you to marry him right here, right now.
Absolutely.
I'm going to do the wedding. Dearly beloved, we are gathered, and you're like, whoa, like the amount of like knowledge to commitment ratio is a little off. But honestly, it doesn't change what I want for an unbeliever, like what I want them to experience. And so I would even plead with them to say, hey, come know him, come meet him. As we journey through the book of Mark, come get introduced to really who Jesus is and how he deals with people, because maybe you'll realize he's not who you thought he was because of what culture might tell you he is, or what the Discovery Channel will tell you around Easter. I mean, that's about to happen. We're gonna get the History Channel and the Discovery Channel and all different kinds of channels talking about and they'll have their own little weird thoughts about who he was. Well, why don't you turn that off and maybe journey with us through the book of Mark so that you can actually see what's recorded and what's written down about him and how he interacted. And that might make you think differently about who he is and maybe how he would see you and how he would interact with you. And I think that that's a really beautiful thing. Man. So I'm excited.
I know, man. I know it's going to be a great time. I know he's really been digging into Mark. It's going to be awesome. I can't wait to see like the movement and how we move, and like I'm excited about it because I've read some of the Gospels and it's always been either Matthew or John. Luke, I mean, if you're feeling spicy,
if you're feeling spicy, I like that.
I mean, because he's very detailed.
Yeah, he's very detailed.
And you're that person, by all means, go for it. But Mark's a different character, and it's kind of interesting because we've had that conversation. But man, I'm so excited. Hey, if you haven't caught the message, we ask that you just go back and listen to it, and maybe find something that you find that really hits home with you. But then also follow along with us on this journey. On another note, discipleship class.
Yeah.
March 21st, 6 to 8 p.m.
Yeah.
If you still haven't signed up, there's still time. We're going to talk about apologetics.
Yeah.
And so we're not going to get into those details right now,
it's gonna be fun.
But it's going to be a really great time. How to defend your faith, and that's such a great thing. So we encourage you guys to go to our website at freedomlifechurch.net, get signed up, or just let us know. Fill out a form at church or whatever you need to do. But man, I'm excited. I'm excited for how this is going to move, and we'll catch you next time.
See you.